Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back with another episode of Way of the Underhive. This series is dedicated to helping brand new players to Necromunda build their starting rosters and learn more about the game mechanics of their favorite gangs. And on today's episode we will be discussing Wyrd Powers introduced by the various editions of Necromunda. We'll discuss each Wyrd Power in detail, give our thoughts of the abilities, and explain how it can be used to help you to achieve victory in your next battle report. So these next few series of videos, we're going to get kind of weird. We're going to be talking about Psykers and their roles in Necromunda. We'll also give you a little bit of a briefing of what the Psyker rules detail in this game setting. We'll also talk about in quite a bit all the Wyrd powers that are available in Necromunda as well. We'll talk about each one of those individual abilities and how best to use those in your campaigns and as well as your games on the tabletop. We'll also provide our conclusive thoughts on what we think about this Wyrd power set. And because this video will be a little bit more of a deeper dive, I will put timestamps in the description box down below so that way you can click and navigate to the part of the video that interests you the most. So that being said, let's talk about Wyrd powers. Alright, so give you the rundown real fast of Psykers and Necromunda. First of all, willpower characteristic is going to be key because the lower the willpower score is for your character, the easier it's going to be for them in order to trigger these mental abilities off. Think of it, you basically take 2d6 and you gotta either match or beat the willpower score for your character. Now, about a 7+ willpower is going to basically give you a 50-50 odds of whether you can get your Wyrd powers off or not. You want to be more like in the 6, the 5, the 4 levels, so that way you can continually get your Wyrd powers off, statistically speaking, at a higher level. And of course, if you can't get that low with your willpower scores to either upgrading your character, you could also do so with some very simple actions you can take in the actual tabletop to help you. For example, every single one of these characters do come with the power called Maintain Control. It is a simple action and it's used for continuous effect Wyrd powers that you might use. All you gotta do, of course, is take a willpower test with a 3+ modifier attached to it. If you manage to beat that score, the ability still keeps on going, otherwise it immediately ends. At the same time, if you do need a little bit of boost to your willpower test, you can take a concentrate action with your Psykers, and what that basically is a basic action that adds +1 to your willpower test the next time you roll it. At the same time, you do have to watch out for Perils of the Warp. If you manage to roll Snake Eyes when you roll for your powers, there's a couple of bad things that can happen to your characters, kind of like miscasting for your magic in Warhammer the Old World. At the same time, if you have rival Psykers in the opposing gang, of course, all they gotta do is roll 2d6 as well and beat your willpower test. And they're able to do so, that means they disrupt your power and your ability doesn't go off either. Now, when it comes to the Perils of the Warp, however, like I said before, double ones is the way you actually trigger that event, and it can actually be quite devastating for your Psykers. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a second. Lastly, you have two types of Psykers in your gangs. You have a sanctioned Psyker, which is nice because you get to re-roll 1 willpower test per battle, which could be extremely useful. Having that ability to re-roll could be proved quite critical if a situation warrants it. Also, you have for most of your fighters, you'll have what's called the non-sanctioned Psyker special rule, which means if your character gets taken out of action, your opponent earns D3 times 10 credits in order to do so, because they're wanted, dead or alive, basically. And if they get captured, they can be immediately sold if captured as well, so you won't be able to get them back in a rescue mission if that does happen. And lastly, the coolest thing about these game mechanics, of course, is your Psyker's ability to access force weapons. Force weapons are actually just normal mundane melee weapons, but if a post-battle action where you do a sign attunement, if you actually pass that roll, you could actually add the power trait as well as a server trait to your force weapons, and that only works in the hands of a Psyker. So for those of you guys who are looking for some ways to make your Psykers even deadlier, may I suggest giving them force weapons. Alright, so let's talk about Perils of the Warp. Whenever you roll double ones or a double 6 when making a willpower test to perform a Wyrd power action, you might actually get the Perils of the Warp, right? So let's go and talk about what that ends up being. You end up rolling a 2d6 and you get one of basically 5 possibilities. If you roll a 2 to 3, you get what's called a tear in reality, and what that rule states is that the Psyker loses control and warp energy tears reality apart around them. Center a 5-inch blast marker on the Psyker. Any model touched by the marker must pass a willpower test or lose a wound or suffer driver wounded effect, and the Psyker then goes out of action. On a 4 through 5, you have the Immaterium Inverse. The warps inverts upon the attempting to control it. The Psyker becomes a target of power regardless of range. If the power is beneficial, the Psyker instead becomes prone and pinned and suffers a strength 6 hit that inflicts 2 damage, ignoring armor saves, and the power has no further effects. On a roll of 6 through 8, you get Whispers of the Warp. The Psyker's mind is filled with screaming demonic voices. The Psyker becomes subject to the Insane condition. Place an insanity marker on the Psyker's fighter card and roll d6 on the Insane table when they activate. On a 9 through 10, you get Warp Surge. The Psyker's power becomes overcharged with warp energy. The Psyker may immediately try to manifest the same power again as a free action, or if they're trying to disrupt the power, they may immediately manifest one of their own powers as a free action. This additional manifestation of the power can trigger Perils of the Warp as normal. After working out the effects of the power, the Psyker becomes prone and pinned and suffers a strength 4 hit, which inflicts 1 damage. And lastly, from 11 through 12, you have Demonic Possession. Demonic energy courses through the Psyker's body. The Psyker increases their movement, strength, toughness, as well as attack characteristics all by 3, and their weapon skill to 2+. The unarmed attacks inflict 2 damage and have an AP of -1. In the end phase of the following round, or if the Psyker generates this result again, they go out of action. So as you can see, some pretty crazy things can happen with Perils of the Warp as well. It triggers either on a double 1 or a double 6 when you actually try to do willpower tests before Wyrd Power, or when attempting to disrupt a Wyrd Power. So psychic abilities are quite nice, but player beware, there are some consequences if you mess up. Alright, so let's talk about the Technomancy Discipline real quick. So when you decide to kind of uniquely spec into Technomancy, you actually get the Technomancer special ability. It's a for Wyrd selects only powers from the Technomancy Discipline. They gain the Techno Affinity special rule. This fighter may reroll any ammo checks they're required to make. Now that's actually a really good ability to have, especially because it's a good general purpose type of ability, because especially if you're armed with any kind of weapon that's a 5+ or higher on your ammo roll type. Or if you have an ammo roll type that actually has things like unstable or limited, for example, you could actually re-roll it real quick, so you don't have to worry about suffering from those penalties. This is a really good ability to have, especially if someone's armed with a specialty weapon like that. Things like plasma guns, web guns, even kind of heavy weapon that requires like a 5 or higher ammo type. This is the ability for you. The very first ability, of course, is called Weapon Jinx. It is a simple action to cast this ability, and with Weapon Jinx, with a snap of their fingers, the Wyrd causes an enemy weapon to malfunction. Choose any enemy fighters within 18 inches of this fighter. The enemy fighter must immediately take an ammo check for one of their weapons chosen by this fighter. Now, this is really good to use against enemies who have high ammo roll weapons like bolt guns or weapons with unstable traits, for example. So if you're actually going into the assault, and you're fighting against an opponent who's got like a plasma gun, for example, you could use this to actually trigger that event, hopefully cause a malfunction to where that weapon explodes and takes the guy out. That, or actually cause them to lose their ability for the weapon, so that way they can't fire at that turn. It's a really good ability to use for things like special weapons as well as heavy weapons as well, or kind of any kind of weapon that might be kind of critical in an assault type situation. Now comes ability number 2, Overcharge, which is also a basic effect to get this off as well. It also has a continuous effect as well, so that way you have a 3+ modifier in order to keep this going. And personally, this is one of my favorite abilities from the Technomancy Discipline. It reads, directing their power into their weapon, the Wyrd greatly increases its effectiveness. While this Wyrd power is maintained, one ranged weapon carried by this fighter improves its strength by 2 and is damaged by 1, but gains the unstable trait. Now with that being said, having +2 weapon strength as well as +1 damage on any weapon of any sort is amazing. Now the downside, of course, is that it gains the unstable trait, but it works amazingly well on low ammo roll weapons. For example, take last guns and last pistols, for example. Imagine firing those weapons at strength 5 with 2 damage. Suddenly this ability becomes really powerful, especially when you put to low ammo weapons like that, just because you don't need to get hotshot last packs anymore for your last pistols or your last gun. A strike at strength 5 with 2 damage, absolutely devastating. And if you have to make an ammo roll for it, all you gotta do is pass with a 2+, so this makes it really good. If you want to, you can kind of be a gambler and go with 4+ type weapons for ammo rolls, things like auto pistols or auto guns, for example. Imagine that, strength 5, 2 damage with rapid fire. At this point, you're outperforming bolt guns without the necessary high ammo roll as well. And of course, if you decide to put man-stopper rounds on your auto pistol, that jumps up to strength 6, 2 damage with rapid fire as well. Dum-dum guns, subguns with dum-dum rounds become strength 6 with 2 damage, which makes it very powerful. So So that's just some examples of some 50-50 ones. However, if you really want to use a basic weapon that can really take advantage of the power of the overcharge ability, I say shotguns actually become really powerful during this time. And the reason why is because solid slugs hit at strength 6, 3 damage with knockback. So even if you manage to get past your enemy's strength, you'll be able to put 4 damage on those guys. One-shot opponents with that thing. At the same time, scatter shot also becomes much more powerful as well. Instead of being strength 2 now, it becomes strength 4 when it comes on the attack as well. Instead of 1 damage, it becomes 2 damage on that. So D6 strength 4, 2 damage hits, absolutely devastating. So this is like I like to say, this is one of my favorite abilities to actually have from the skill tree. This alone would justify why you should take this discipline. Ability number 3 is called Hardening. It's also basic action with a continuous effect, and it says, with a thought, the Wyrd renders their armor as thick and heavy as sheet iron. While this Wyrd power is maintained, this fighter improves their save by 2 to a max of 2+, or gains a 5+ armor save if they did not have one before. However, while this power is maintained, this fighter must reduce their movement characteristics by 1 to a minimum of 1. So yes, it is true that the -1 to 1 movement is actually quite bad, but with +2 to armor rolls, it's very much worth the risk. It's actually one of the better powers in this ability tree, in my opinion, especially if you're fighting from a defensive position. So let's pretend, for example, you have like a fighter who's got a Wyrd power with the Technomancy ability that you want to have heavily armored. If this guy's not moving anywhere and he's shooting from a distance, you could just cast this power and still be okay because you're not really moving anywhere stationary for the most part. Or if you're using for a guy who does like long range shooting, for example, it could be also another really powerful ability as well. So these are things that you could keep in effect with this character, makes it a little bit more survivable. The 4th ability is called Manipulate Door. It is a simple action to use this ability. It says the Wyrd causes doors to open or close with a wave of their hand. This fighter may immediately open or close a single unlocked door anywhere in the battlefield. Now, this one may seem very situational because it is, and the reason why is because it's not as useful as the other powers in this discipline. However, it's very effective if you're fighting in an area with like Zor Mortalis, for example, or anything that requires doors. So that way you could use this at any point of distance, and that way you can just kind of open it up and not have to worry about having other fighters waste their actions in order to do so. Like I say, it's very situational, so it might not be as useful as other powers, but still, not bad all things considered. Power level 5, Manipulate Lumens. This is a double action in order to get this one, so if you decide to use this ability, you're using all your actions to do it. It says, unleashing their power, the Wyrd can either cause all power to the dome to cease, plunging into darkness, or bring ancient power systems back to life and illuminate the gloom. The pitch black rules immediately come into effect, or immediately end if they were already in effect as well from the Necromunda rule. Now, this is quite situational as well, so long as you're not in the Ash Waste. If you're not in the Ash Waste, this ability is not going to do you any good. However, any other time though, this is actually really invaluable power, and that's like my second most favorite power in this. Right? The reason why is because you can turn off your light on your enemies who don't have visibility help. So, for example, if you really want to take advantage of this, playing a campaign where you equip all your guys with photo goggles, so that way you can turn off the lights. And if your opponents don't have any kind of visibility aid like infrasights or photo goggles or flares or photolumens, they're not going to be able to see you, but you can see them, and you can actually manipulate conditions on the battlefield in order to do that. At the same time, being able to turn on the lights would also be extremely useful for an Underhive campaign as well, where visibility becomes an issue, because now you can just remove all visibility problems by just using the Manipulate Lumens ability. So for those of you guys going to Underhive, this is a very powerful ability. And the final ability is called Crack Lock. It is a basic action to do this, and it says, with a snap of their fingers, the Wyrd cause electronic and mechanical locks to open. Choose a single locked door that is within 18 inches of this fighter. That door immediately becomes unlocked and open. Alternatively, this fighter may immediately open a loot cask anywhere on the battlefield, choosing its contents rather than rolling randomly. Now, once again, this is also another very situational type of power as well, at least in the surface it is. Now, it may not be as useful as other powers in this discipline, but it's still effective if you're playing in Zor Mortalis, for example, or any battlefield that has doors, so you can lock doors or open doors as you need to, which could be quite powerful. And because if you have any battlefield conditions where you have loot caskets, the buff for switching loot containers is also quite nice, and you can actually net the best rewards that you want from it because you get to choose what's inside that loot casket as well. So like I said before, Crack Lock may not be as useful as other powers in this discipline, but it's still got its place, and if you got ability to use it, I suggest doing so. So in conclusion, Technomancy is actually one of the best psychic disciplines available for players. It's actually one of my personal favorite ones to use just because of the nice amount of combat as well as defensive buffs that you can give yourself and rest members of your gang as well. And you also have some really good environmental control. Now granted, half of the powers are actually quite useless if you're playing out in the Ash Waste. The ability to open and lock doors, for example, or to turn on and turn off the lights, not so great out in the Ash Waste. But if you're playing in the Underhive, if you're playing in the Underhills, that's actually going to be a really good ability for you to have. So that's the reason why I like Technomancy so much. Now, if I had to tier these abilities from the best to the worst, my recommendation would go like this. Number one is actually going to be Overcharge. Overcharge is a great way to make your really basic and lackluster weapons extremely powerful. You can cause a lot of damage with that ability, and that alone puts in the number one spot. And number two would actually be the Hardening. The ability to give yourself a 2+ on your armor save is always good. Now, granted, you do suffer that -1 to your movement penalty, but if you're fighting defensively, though, that's not going to be much of an issue. Number three, I would put down Manipulate Lumens, and that's the reason why is because the ability to turn on the lights and turn them off again in the Underhills as well as the Underhive is extremely valuable. If you're going to go to the Underhills campaign and you want to get rid of those visibility rules, Manipulate Lumens is the way to go for that. Now at the same time, right in the fourth place, we have power number one, which is the Weapon Jinx. Having the ability to make your opponents roll an ammo check from one of their weapons is always a good thing to have, especially if your opponent has like a really high ammo roll weapon, like a 6+ or a 5+ ammo roll. You can really mess with your opponents that way. After that, and my next one for number 5, I'd say Crack Lock will probably be the fifth most important one. Not so much for the door opening and locking and unlocking ability, but more for because you can check loot caskets. So that might actually make it quite useful. And number 4, the very last one's going to be the number 4 power, which is Manipulate Door. In my opinion, is not as useful. I mean, the ability to open and close doors at a single whim is, I guess it's kind of nice, but in all terms of other powers, it's quite useless when you compare to everything else. So there you guys have it. That is my analysis on the Technomancy Discipline. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this week, guys. I'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.